Hi, my name is Rebecca Coyle, and this is my final presentation for PAD 3003, Introduction to Public Administration. So my presentation is on budgeting and funding. Funding is essential for the continued operations of public safety. Funding is contingent on proper budgeting. If you don't have a proper budget, you can't possibly have the proper funding to run a department thoroughly. There are many issues surrounding budgeting and funding. These include ethical, moral, and legal issues. There are also many things we can do to help minimize these issues, as I will speak about in this presentation. So there are several levels of bureaucratic power in public administration when it comes to funding, budgeting, grants, all parts of it, as most parts of the government are. First, there's the federal level of bureaucratic power. This is the broadest scope and has the most power, and it can grant large sums of assistance or help in the form of things like FEMA. Next is the state level of bureaucratic power, and the state level has the ability to approve grants and other funding, as well as be kind of the go-between between the local and federal governments. The most important, personally, I think the most important level of bureaucratic power is the local level. This is the level where the officials involved will be the most familiar with the public safety departments that are involved in the funding and budgeting that they will be dealing with. These officials are residents of the community and taxpayers of the community that they are serving for. So they are the most likely to have its best interests in mind. These officials include chiefs, commissioners, sheriffs, and mayors. So these people live in the community, they pay taxes. These departments directly affect their lives and their families, so they are most likely to want to make the best decisions for these departments. So in this next slide, we'll be discussing applicable administrative law. From the research that I was doing, the laws that I could find that are pertinent are usually referring to grants and funding when it comes to budgeting. These laws cover issues surrounding morals and ethics as well. The GPC, or Grants Policy Committee, has been implemented. It is a group of federal grant experts tasked with assuring grant laws are being followed appropriately. The Federal Financial Assistance Management Improvement Act of 1999 was passed by Congress to better coordination between grant making officials, so they did recognize that there was a communication problem and are working to fix it. So for this next slide, we're discussing ethical and moral issues when it comes to budgeting and funding in public administration. There are several issues that are kind of common in the human population in general, but especially in those such as politicians or those who come into large amounts of money or power. There just does appear to be some corruption. Examples of these ethical or moral issues include lack of transparency. If you're not transparent with those around you, there's usually considered to be a reason that you don't want to be transparent. There's also been a history of bias towards a particular political party or group. Maybe those that didn't support you in the election, now you have a bias against them, so a bias towards another group or person. Racism, coercion, bribery, or taking bribes to do certain things or approve or disapprove certain funding, favoritism, and being dishonest, which kind of encompasses all of those issues together. So the bargaining and negotiation process is extremely important when it comes to funding and budgeting. It's extremely important to follow the processes that are in place, or you can risk losing the contract or article that you're fighting for. Preparation and planning is obviously the most important step. If you don't plan accurately, accordingly, or thoroughly enough, you can also not get what you're trying to achieve. Negotiations require the most experienced person in the union and someone who will be able to stand the ground against their administration when it comes to open negotiations. So there are several stages of policy development. We begin with problem identification. This is, in other words, finding the issue in which a policy needs to be implemented in order to fix. The next stage is policy development, and this is the planning and preparation stage in which you will put together a draft proposal in order to move to the next step, which is policy adoption. This is where both parties agree on the draft of the policy and will make any changes that are needed here. Once you move to the next step, which is policy implementation, or which the policy will be enforced, there will be a lot of education involved before the policy is placed into effect to avoid any confusion or misinterpretation. Finally, the policy will move into the evaluation stage. The evaluation stage continues for the life of the policy. It is always evolving and changing and being evaluated for accuracy and how thorough the policy is.